taking the time to listen is important, right? But I think it's a very individual thing about why people don't like change, but it's about being respectful for their point of view, listening closely, and then trying to teach them a different way of thinking about it. Because then it's not the uphill battle, right? It's like, oh, I get, what she's doing. But that takes time and effort, and that's what makes leadership hard.
Welcome back to Torch Talk, the show where we spotlight bold local leaders growing businesses with grit and purpose. Today we are joined by Linda Allison, founder and president of Allison Management Solutions. Linda is a coach, a strategist, and a master of turning leadership potential into practical performance. She's worked in some of the toughest business environments, one of the things I love about you, from the shop floor to the boardroom, and now helps teams and executives unlock clarity, focus, and long-term results. This episode is about more than strategy. It's about what happens when leaders start doing the things that they already know they need to do. Yes. Mm-hmm. So, Linda, we're going to do a little history. So we want to know a little bit more about you, and then we'll jump into all of the coaching, all the practical things I'm really excited to talk to you about. So I know that you have a really strong morning routine. Mm-hmm. What are your morning routine must-haves?
So I'm very blessed to have time to do this now, but it's get up at 6, have a cup of coffee, do my strength exercises, read my scripture, take a shower. And if I'm staying home, working from home that day, I start a load of laundry. If not, I'm out of the house then at that point. So every day, same things. Because it's about what you value, right?
How long does it take you to drink your cup of coffee? Because I just realized this morning I need about 45 minutes.
Say half an hour and I'm ready to get up and start exercising.
Okay.
But really, these routines, it's about orienting your time around what you value the most. So what am I doing? First of all, I'm waking up and I give myself a little bit of self-care, right? Mm-hmm. Second of all, I'm taking care of some of my physical health, right? Then my spiritual health, right? And then I'm out the door to go help other people. Yeah.
Good. All right. So what is one book you think every leader should read?
I know it's a little old school, but my favorite book for anybody who's like, I never read a management book or a leadership book and I want to read one is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Covey. I just think that almost everything I read now, you can take threads of it back to that book. And it's really, if you can master yourself and your own actions, which is what this book talks about, then you're going to be ready to take on other things. So I love that book.
So I know that you have done a fair amount of training for the workforce. Is that really the base of what you're using to develop curriculum? Is that something that business owners should look at? Like, I'm thinking about our training programs.
Yeah.
And I've read that book, but I haven't, I don't know.
It's a long time ago, probably, because it's a classic. I think there's kind of 2 parts to developing a leader. There is the B part, and that is who you are as a person and your character and your values. And I think it's very difficult to move on to the next part unless you have that straight. So 7 Habits is really a B book. It's about how do I decide who I want to be and how do I live that out every day. The second part of leadership is the do part, and that is how do I give feedback? How do I do an appraisal? How do I manage the do part of what I do every day? And so the second part of learning to be a leader would be about mastering some of those do skills. But if you don't have the B part first, you're going to struggle to build trust, which is important.
So what are if that's one of your favorite books, what are some of the key principles that you still use, maybe even now?
Oh, sure. Anything sharpen the saw comes to my mind, which is always be learning. And I know that's real cliche, but I think that's true. And sometimes I'll talk about things and I'll be citing some neuroscience book I read, and people look at you like, how much have you read? And you're like, well, I've had a long time to read, but I've always been reading and learning and trying to upgrade your skills. I think it's helpful sometimes to think about what you do in your job as your craft, right? This isn't a job I have. This is a craft that I'm doing. And so when we have that idea in our mind, we can think of ourselves as craftsmen, and then it becomes easier to put on the mentality of how do I get better at my craft? Because that's truly, if we're spending all day at work, right? We're spending a lot of our life essence at work. Why not be good at it? Why not work at being the best you can be at it and feel fulfilled from that? So,
I love that. Continually growing is one of our core values, so it fits right in with that, and it's so true. I mean, marketing is always changing, period, but it's also just how I am as well. Like, I always want to learn and grow, and there's always something else out there to optimize, improve, perform, all of the things.
Yeah.
All right, Linda, tell us a little bit about how your leadership journey began, or maybe the road really to lead you where you're at now to Allison Management Solutions. Give us some of the history leading up to that.
Yeah, so I started out in the 1980s.
You showed me a picture once.
I know. I had big hair. It was pretty big, and also not really blonde, but at that point. But I started out as a low-level leader in the shop after I graduated from college, and it was very difficult because here I am. It's the 1980s. I'm a female in manufacturing, which is what I did. So there really weren't very many females, so I had a lot to overcome. When I was doing that. But some of what I had to overcome was my own ignorance and stupidity because I think when we start out as leaders, I always say I was young, dumb, and arrogant. Like I thought I knew stuff, but then you get in there and you try to do it and you realize, wow, this is more complicated than I thought. And so I went from that place of really not knowing a thing and trying to learn. But I think the key throughout the whole process for me was I viewed everything as a problem to solve, right? So that's a really good mindset, I think, because when you run into obstacles, it isn't I'm right, they're wrong. It's like, okay, how do I make this work? And so really a lot of what I learned about leadership was that whole process of problem solving, like, hey, this is not working, right? This interaction with this person or how I gave this feedback or whatever, that's not working. So you're continually watching what you're doing and thinking about how do I make that better? So eventually I moved up through individual contributors, supervisor, manager, director, and then eventually vice president. And so every step of that journey has a whole different thing to learn and a whole different way of seeing. And so as you move through the journey, you begin to have a broader and broader and broader perspective about organizations and people and what things need to be done. And I think that's just a natural thing. And so I learned on the job by making mistakes and learning how to solve problems.
How long were you in manufacturing then?
If I had to admit this, let's see, it would have been about 35 years.
Okay. So you decided to leave that and start, take some of your experience and start coaching, or kind of talk us through that thought process?
Yeah, so I was vice president in a fairly big, a $425 million division of a $1 billion corporation. It's publicly held. So it's all those things that, you think about with those things. And I was in supply chain, and my job was my life. I was working 60 hours a week, flying all over the world, doing all that stuff. And I think you get to a point in your 50s and you start saying, I love this job and this is a lot of fun, but there is more to life than this. And maybe I'm saying in my 50s, people at different ages and make those decisions. But I got there and I just looked around and said, I am not working my priorities. So some of the things you might learn in 7 Habits about determining what your values are and examining how you're living your life against them, I got to a point where it was like, this is not a match anymore. And so I quit and went home and said, now what am I going to do with myself? And I originally thought, it would be great to be a COO, CEO in a local company, because I definitely felt like I had the experience and abilities to do that. But I wasn't really finding an open arms for that at that point. So I did some internal consulting for a local company, and then I decided, I think I could do this. I think I would really enjoy doing this, and I do. I think the biggest, most wonderful things about it is you get to move people from A to B. People do better. People improve their businesses, their lives, because I have a chance to walk alongside of them, and that is a privilege, and I love doing that.
Talk us a little bit through your coaching process. So, what does it look like to work with you? What are the common problems that you're solving? What do you see consistently?
So it depends on what I get hired for, but most of the time I'll take people through a very similar process. The first thing we'll do is we'll take a look at their financials and make sure they understand them. So, when I get hired into businesses, usually there's 2 things that are happening there that are creating frustration or not allowing growth. The first is there's often not a lot of focus. Okay, so there's not a broad enough focus. So either someone's running from pillar to post trying to do everything in the business all at once themselves, and so they're really scattered in their effort and not focusing on managing the business. Or they might not be doing that, but they're thinking about maybe 2 or 3 aspects of the business, like what's my product and who's my customer, but they're missing taking a look at the whole organization and saying, how does my operations need to be to support that? What do I need to do to develop my team to support that? So they're too focused on some things and no focus on other things. So the other thing is knowledge. So brings me back to my comment about reading your financials. So oftentimes folks have a whole bunch of wonderful knowledge about many things, especially around their product, their service, and how they're doing things there, but they're missing a key piece of knowledge to be able to manage the business. And why should they have that? That's not what they've been doing. They've been doing the law or putting on a roof or whatever that they've been doing, not going to business school. So I can come in and shore up that knowledge gap. So when I start out, a lot of times I'll do we'll look at the financials and I'll make sure they understand how to read them and also make sure that they are being maintained in a way that gives them information, because that's what they're for. So we'll do that, and then we'll go through strategic planning with the organization. I can do it with the owner or a team, depending on what they want to do. And we overcome these gaps, right, in their focus. A lot of times you'll see, I'll never forget, I sat with this one guy, and he was in a manufacturing company, and he was frustrated with some things, and we went through kind of really quickly through his strategy, and it was product, and it was customer, and it was things like that. He never once mentioned operations. Well, guess where he was having problems? Operations. So I think that's more common than you think, and I see that in businesses. Once we get through the strategic planning, then we'll make a plan. Okay, so often businesses will make a plan like, here's the things I want to do to improve my business, and that's what we go through, but we'll do it very organized. Like, okay, so you said you want to be here in your financials, you said you want to develop this in your product, you said, so we'll take those you saids and we'll make them into concrete actions, and we'll set some goals around what they're trying to achieve so they can see if they're making progress or not. But anybody can do that, and lots of people do that, right? I mean, I do it, and I have my own way of that. But I think the most critical thing for businesses is not to make a plan, it's to do a plan, right? And so one of the things I learned in the big corporation was what we call plan deployment, which is a fancy way of saying we're just going to make sure that we set a management system in place so that we make sure that we act and treat this as a priority. Also, one of the wonderful things about that is it's a way to connect people together. So I'm doing that in another client of mine where they're kind of growing their middle management team from an entrepreneur to this middle management team. But they gotta make sure they're working in a coordinated way, that everybody's on the same page. And so having a system like that allows everybody on the team to see who's doing what, checking to see if it's aligned with the top priorities, and we make sure that we are connected together. We monitor it frequently so that if somebody's getting off track, it's not a blame and shame session, but it's okay, here's the reasons that's happening. How do we pull the team around that to make sure that we don't allow, that person, that not the person as much as that thing that they're trying to accomplish to get behind. Or, hey, we bit off too much. We understand why that's not happening, and we're gonna push that date out. So that's coordinated and expectations are met, and people understand how when the business moves around. So I think that is far more important than making a beautiful plan, is doing the plan.
So how are you actually managing that tangibly? Is that like with an actual tool?
Yeah. Yes. I have a tool that I developed based on my experiences. And I refer to it as an A3. A3 is just the size of a paper in England, like we have 8.5 by 11 or whatever. In Europe, they have A3. But what it means is you have a one-page planning document, and the whole plan that I'm talking about here goes on that document. So we create an A3 that it has everything that you want to do, and obviously it's not every project plan or whatever, but the big things you want to do for the year on that plan. And then every month, we would meet and as a team, all the people whose names on there to be responsible for things, and we review where we're at on that. Now, often leaders, they get this in place and they're like, well, I don't need to come to this anymore. Oh, no. If it's not important to you, it's not important to anybody else. So it's really just clarity on what we're trying to do, consistency on follow-up, and then support. And then the last piece, we talked about continuous learning, and I talked about learning by making mistakes and problem solving and things like that. I think that's one of the most important things about it is, so you try stuff. It's all an experiment in a way, right? Like, I think if I do this activity, I'm going to grow sales, or I'm going to reduce scrap, or whatever it is that we're trying to do. And so when we have this process, we actually get to see, did my experiment work? So I thought if I'm going to do this, it's going to make this better. Did it? If not, let's not waste time on this anymore. Let's move on to something effective. So it's sort of, we learned a scientific method in school, right? We design an experiment, we see if it works, and then we learn something from it. And it's kind of a business's way of doing that. Like, did this work? And if it did, good, let's just do more of it. And if not, then we don't want to waste our energy on it.
I say all the time that's what marketing is. Like, we're always we're going to develop a theory, test the theory, then optimize and change off of that. But really, it is true that that's also business.
Yes.
Everything thinks it's black and white, linear, and it's really not.
Totally
and you have to have like that 360 view so that you can.
Well, and let's hope anybody that's going to be a leader doesn't think it's going to be so automatic like that, because not only does that happen in business, but people are messy, and every one of them is different. So you can't say, like, this worked for that person and it's going to work for this person. It's not like that. So another component of leadership is to really, first of all, you got to like people. If you don't like people, don't become a leader, because you're just going to be frustrated all day. But, it's about caring about the people as individuals, sensing what they need, and working to create either a system or an individual interaction that helps them fulfill their needs.
Linda, how do you coach leaders who are resistant to change? And I don't know that you actually do very much with clients, or maybe you work with an owner and then the people that you need to coach are a little bit more resistant to it. How do you handle that on it? I know that's a common thing that employers run into. So what advice would you be? How do you handle coaching in those situations?
Yeah, usually it's not the person who hired me, because they hire you because they want change. Sometimes they don't know what to do for that, but they know they want it to be different. But yeah, it's interesting, because you'll go one layer below and you realize why things aren't changing. It's because people get very afraid, I think. I've seen examples of folks who were like, I don't want anything to change, because it makes I feel insecure. Like, if other people know what I do, then I'm not valuable anymore. And then you see people that are like, well, we've done it this way forever. Okay, so for people like you and me, the first thing we say is, then we need to change that right now, because that's not how it goes. So I think it's really about, people cannot act differently than they think, right? So to force a behavior on somebody when they are not agreeing in their mind, it's, first of all, that's really hard to do. Second of all, it doesn't stick. So you have to focus on, again, back to leaders have to know people, is to try to work with the person who's resisting change and find out what it is that is the problem. Sometimes they're really smart and they know the thing you're suggesting is not, and so they will be resistant to that. And so taking the time to listen is important, right? But I think it's a very individual thing about why people don't like change, but it's about being respectful for their point of view, listening closely, and then trying to teach them a different way of thinking about it. Because then it's not the uphill battle, right? It's like, oh, I get, what she's doing. But that takes time and effort, and that's what makes leadership hard.
To follow up on that a little bit, what's something that looks like a leadership problem on the surface, but usually isn't? It might actually be the opposite. What doesn't look like a problem on the surface, but it actually is.
That's an easier one.
I see that one a lot. Too.
Yeah, that's the easier one. Because sometimes people will say, it's my folks. I can't delegate because there's something wrong with the people that are working in my organization. Well, well, that's actually a leadership problem, right? Or if you hear a company make a mistake or whatever, and to you, customer service tells you that it was a human error, well, I'm deeply trained from working in manufacturing that is never an answer, right? The answer is it's a leadership issue, it's a management issue. You didn't train the people, so on how to handle this issue. So I think it's the opposite. But you see poor financial management. That's really a leadership issue and a decision issue, right? High turnover is a leadership issue usually. Those kind of things end up not being the issue they're pointing at.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what we want to do some tips now. Oh. You are full of them.
Can you tell?
Okay. What advice would you give to a new manager or team lead?
Oh, of course. The first thing I would say is listen before you do something. Okay, listen carefully and observe. Go and try to understand what is happening before you go in and charging like a wild elephant and make all kinds of changes. Especially if you're being promoted in the same organization as you're working in, because if you're bright and ambitious, you're probably down there thinking, if I was the boss, I would do X, Y, and Z. I would just caution you to take a little bit of time to observe, because most of the time people aren't completely incompetent, and those things got that way for a reason. Maybe it's not a good reason, but be careful, because you can really damage trust and damage your reputation when you go in and make a lot of changes. And by the way, people will just stand back and watch. Yeah.
It's a good one. I've experienced some of those, both myself and with other people. So all similar, like I ended up in a leadership role at a very young age in a bank. And I thought I knew a lot. And I was a good worker, and there was a reason why they promoted me and all of those things, but I didn't know nearly as much as I thought I did. Mm-hmm. So also seeing, that's one of the things I've learned, just to be a little bit more patient and observant the older that I get, even in client relationships, and really trying to make sure that I assess a situation fully and understand where all the players are at before we make a plan and we're moving forward.
Right. Because you can miss stuff. And like I said, you can hurt your credibility because you do dumb stuff. But so I'm glad to hear I'm not the only one that started out I'm going to fix the world, right? But then I learned that the world wasn't like how I saw it. Mm-hmm. Especially for me. When I first started, I was 25 years old, and I was supervising in a shop where almost everybody that worked there was hardly any women. They were male, and they were older than my dad, and I come in here and start trying to tell people what to do. I'm sure they had a lot of humor out of that, but I learned.
I wouldn't take let's take that back. There's a lot of young people in my industry, and that's fine. They might know certain aspects of technical things better than I do, but if they came in and started trying to boss the situation around, I might I might have some problems with that. So I can only imagine.
And I don't know what it was like for you. It was really, I feel sad now that I'm a coach, is no one really helped me. They pretty much said, go learn by falling down. And so I learned a lot by just not, falling down. And I did have some training, et cetera. But when I look at what a coach would have done for me, and when I was an executive, I would love to have had a coach. I think I would have been so helpful because it was so stressful. So I feel they throw you in the deep end, say, go make this happen. And so we learn the way I describe, which is solving problems, learning from mistakes, et cetera.
There are so many good things that have changed in the workforce in the last 30 plus years. So I cannot say that I would wish my experiences on somebody else, but also I am the leader I am because of those experiences. So sexual harassment, not being in the workplace is great.
Yes.
I'm totally desensitized to men just hitting on you every single day, period. That's just how it was.
Yes.
So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I do say often, because I started working when I was 14, my parents didn't know. If they had known, if my daughter was working in a restaurant or wherever she's at and she was getting hit on, at the rate that I would probably pull her out pretty quick, but I don't know. That's just one of the things. There's a lot of, we are better trained as leaders now. Companies have realized that there needs to be more structure, preparedness, all of the things. That being said, not getting hazed in by the older
Oh, yeah.
generational I mean, like, that was a real thing. And not just like in restaurants, because I worked through a lot of restaurants in college and things like that, but I mean, really, like at the bank that I started at, like there was a lot of mistreatment just because that's how things were done.
Yes,
period. But
agree.
that culturally, those are some of the things that have shifted a lot over the last 30 years.
They have.
And those are good, but at the same time, it has produced like a generation that isn't as used to feedback or doesn't have to deal with as hard of those things. Like, you know,
Yeah,
I don't know. That has been challenging to navigate.
No, I get the whole idea of I don't wish it on them, but I wish it on them kind of idea, because the truth is those experiences built my character and my ability to become who I became. Because if I was going to succeed at all, no one was cheering for me, right? There's the girl, right? I had to be more qualified and I had to perform better. And so those two things drove my whole career. So am I sorry for it? Sometimes, because there was things that happened that were really not cool and would never happen today. And there's the whole, like, people think, oh, they were just also sexist. They were just living with the paradigm that they grew up with. So, like, here, this is unusual. Some young woman just all of a sudden in our environment, it's all been men, you know. So I don't know that people were like, let's dominate the women, you know. But I feel like they had ideas about women what they could and couldn't do, and I had to bust those. So I had to have more qualifications. I had to perform better on the job, and yeah, I got paid less to do the same job as the men, and all those kind of things that I endured. But you know what? You know, I endured. I became undeniable, so they could not give me the promotion, and I ended up having a really pretty wonderful career. And now I get
undeniable.
Yeah.
Linda, what is lighting your fire right now, personally or professionally?
Well, I think it's, you know, in the last few years, as I have worked on my business and what it is that I offer uniquely and what I enjoy doing with people, with businesses, it's really about the difference I can make, the impact that I can have. It's so fun. I can tell you that, like watching somebody learn a new thing and master that, watching somebody's business succeed and for them to feel comfortable, that lights my fire. I mean, it makes me feel like it's all, you know, this is where I should be and what I should be doing. And all that path that I took all these years has led to this amazing moment where I get to do that. And also, I feel like that's attached to my spiritual life and my ability to take my gifts and use those for the good of other people.
I love that. That's great. That's good to hear. And to know that, like, the career being over isn't the career being over.
No.
Like, there's life after that. So
Not at all.
Purpose is always still there. Would you like the chance to give a shout out to a business, a leader, a community partner making an impact in the world of leadership or organizational development? This is totally optional, but something, if you would want to give a shout out to anybody, you could.
Okay, so I would say it's fun that I work with ATI, Ohio State here in Worcester, and they have a supervisor basics class. I am part of that, so I teach 5 of the 8 modules of that. But it is so fun because I get to work with these first-time supervisors who are making their first mistakes, right? And they're going out there. So I would say I really love that Worcester ATI is providing that resource to local businesses because I think those are the things that when you first start out you really need.
True, and employers can't hardly keep up. So they don't always have the time. So that's another resource that they have. They can send employees through that training and help them take some of the workload off of themselves to bring employees with some experience in training.
Well, and a lot of companies will say, I value my people and I want to spend time and effort developing them, but it's hard. I mean, we
only have so much time in the day.
And it's like all this and that, kind of thing. And so this is a resource that's close by, and they don't have to necessarily participate in the time, and it's just a follow-up from it. Yeah.
Okay, so where can people connect with you and learn more about Allison Management Solutions?
So I do have a website. It's LindaAllisonResults.com. Yeah, I'm really good at that. You can tell Lindsey's not my marketer. Or you can look for me on Facebook and Instagram and find my contact information there. And
You're also on LinkedIn.
I am on LinkedIn. You're right.
So leadership is about more than knowing. It's about doing the right things with the right people at the right time. And Linda knows how to get you there, which that's actually true. Linda was a part of the beginning of Fierce. She helped us with her A3 that she was talking about. So I have hands-on experience with the tool. It is great, and it did help us define some values and some initial goals with the business and organization and get structured financially. So we still use some of those tools today, forecasting and things like that. So it is very valuable. I highly recommend Linda. She is a personal friend who I value, but also a business friend, and I always go to her for advice. So if you are a business who's out there thinking, I kind of need help, I don't even know what I need help, Linda's always down for a cup of coffee or a lunch or a chat or whatever. So
Absolutely.
I recommend looking her up and reaching out. Thank you so much for listening to Torch Talk today. Thank you for being a part of us with this podcast. You did a great job.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me.